You have a supply and you have a demand function. The supply has something like this, where instead of A and B, you have actual numbers. The demand is a very similar equation, where instead of C and D, you have numbers. And you just, to solve for the equilibrium quantity, you just set supply equal to demand, meaning you literally set this equal to this, A plus B times Q equals C minus D times Q, and you solve for Q. Does anyone want me to show them, using these letters instead of numbers, how you actually use algebra to solve for Q? Okay. So I'm starting for here. How do we solve for Q? I'm going to rewrite this. Here, all I did was I brought dq to the left-hand side because I want q all alone over the left-hand side. This was my first step. I added dq to each side, so I have that there. Then, I brought a from here over here. I subtracted a from both sides. Then I want q all alone, so I factor it out of this. And then finally, to get q all alone, that's going to give you an equilibrium quantity. Again, instead of letters, you're just going to have numbers. You need to remember how to do the algebra, or of course, you could have on your cheat sheet these kind of steps here. You could have the end equation as long as you know what C and A is supposed to be. I've noticed some people often just do an example, like these equations here. They just do the steps of solving for Q and P, and then they can easily apply it to supply and demand equations of a different number. Once you have the equilibrium quantity, the number, you can just plug it back into the supply and demand equations, and it'll spit out the equilibrium price. You can do it, insert it into both equations as a way of checking yourself. 2 curves across. Was this sufficient for this? Would anybody like me to come to where they are?
Over there. What's that? Never mind.
Is anybody having trouble getting the new supply curve? This is the old supply curve, and for the new supply curve, all it does is it says, and remember, you plug in any Q here, this equals MC, the marginal cost. So plug in any quantity, it tells you the cost of producing that unit. And all this says in number 2 is that the cost goes up 10 for each unit. So it's like all we have to do is come over here and add 10 to the equation, which is easier just to put in the intercept. And that's it. And that's the new supply curve. So the intercept of the supply curve just went up 10. That's all. Do I leave some notes with anybody?
So you don't subtract 200 from 100. You find the middle.
That middle number, this your two times.
Yeah.
Right. So this middle number is
Oh, that's what it is.
Both of them equal.
Oh, they did.
so when you find this side,
Yeah, and now we'll Yep.
so the consumer surplus, and then I'll have times 60 times 1 million, the producer, 200 minus 80. Like the dividers, say between the two triangles, they might be good.
Like height is just a quantity.
The bottom is one.
See that right here.
Yeah.
From close to answer.
Oh my God.
Alright, so point equilibrium is what we can
I don't know. Like, I
apply to make
Yeah.
Okay. So this would mean.
It'd actually be a decrease because it's going left on quantity, and at any price they'll produce less.
Okay, okay.
Can I see yours real
Yeah.
quick? Can you pull up for a minute, I want to post the answer.
As long as it's right, if they're right, no, I'm nervous.
You're right.
I'm going to check.
Thank you.
Remember, most of them-
Do I start like that?
Okay, I'm going to post the answers to half of them. One equilibrium quantity is 5 million. Is that what y'all getting? Equilibrium price is 140. Producer surplus was 100 million. Consumer surplus was 150 million. Now, if this right here is really freaking people out, really scaring people, there's no need to be scared because the question, there's going to be a question on the exam like this. And the supply and demand equations are going to be like this with lots of zeros and lots of decimal places. But all you have to do is what you just did here. You know, you can write the answer to this homework on a cheat sheet and be able to replicate it on the test. And with a little practice, you can do it. I promise you, anyone can do it. You know exactly what you're going to need to know. It's just a question of memorizing and doing it.
So whenever we did the equilibrium price, we were supposed to do it for both A plus B and C minus B, or we're supposed to get the same answer?
You mean when you plug it into here?
Yeah, I plugged in 5 for the Q, but I did both equations here.
Right.
So we're supposed to do 2 equations?
If you do it on either one, you should get the same answer.
Right.
I always do both just to be thorough, and it's a way of checking your answers, but you don't have to.
Okay. So, but they're supposed to match.
They are supposed to match, right. Yeah, and this here, where you get the equilibrium price, you should get the exact same answer. Otherwise, it's not the equilibrium quantity. I'm going to write up here how I get, say, the producer surplus or consumer surplus. Consumer surplus. This is just a triangle, a right triangle. I know you used to base being on the bottom. For some reason, economists, we have a reason we flip it in our mind. A reason you don't need to know. But always just think about it like this. You know, either way, you know that consumer surplus is going to be 1/2 times base times height. And the base over here, this goes from 140 to 200. And the distance between 140 and 200 is 60. Or you can just say 200 minus 140 is the length of that segment. Then the length from here to here, this is the origin, 0. and it goes all the way to here to 5 million. So the height is 5 million. And that's all we got consumer surplus. And again, you're going to have to do that. A consumer surplus, we just memorize how to do it. We've done a number, you just keep practicing it, you'll get it.
So for this one, there's no change in the demand equation, or is there an increase in the demand as well?
No, there's no change in the demand
Okay,
equation.
so for this one, the demand would still be 200 minus.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, so when you're calculating all the rest, everything stays the same except for.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, from 3 on, everything is exactly the same except the intercept of the supply curve. For number 5, if you're there already, if you're just asking how's the change in consumer surplus, it's simpler than you probably think. There was consumer surplus here before the change, then there's a new consumer surplus. You take the new consumer surplus, subtract the old, that change will be a negative number, and that's how much consumers are hurt. Anybody like me to come help them? What's all? Equilibrium price.
So this is the old point. Okay. What we've done is this.
Yeah.
Which means there's new price equilibrium at this point.
Yeah, but I mean that gets you right into it every time.
So the quantity decreases.
I'll do the equation.
Yeah, like you'll give us like this, that, and then just a line.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's just like that. Price and quantity. Yeah, they'll change. Don't shift the name. I like that. For number 2, where it's asking you to show graphically what's going on, you just do you had an old supply curve, you had a new supply curve. Now, I gave you the old, I'll tell you how to change, you get the new. I haven't said anything changes with demand, so demand stays exactly the way it was. You know, if I don't tell you consumers value pork more or less, demand doesn't change. This was the old equilibrium price, old equilibrium quantity, new equilibrium quantity, new equilibrium price. But that's kind of a messy graph. You haven't done it like this before. This was just, that question was just to help you figure out what exactly I'm asking in the math. You will not have to do that question on the exam. And if you're kind of scarce with time right now, I would probably just skip that one altogether. I'm going to go ahead and write the answers to the rest of it. Let me come around and help you get the answers if you hadn't already. Is that a good next thing to do? Okay. And what I would do if you're having trouble with the math in this, Chris Isaac's going to be having a review session for 2 hours on Sunday night, like 6 to 8. I would go in at 6 and I would just keep practicing the problems. We've done a number. Keep practicing them over and let him help you when you hit a snag. And you practice it 4 or 5 times and you'll have it, I think. I'm not pushing you off onto him, I'll help you too, but you've got 2 hours of them, you can use them and abuse them right before the exam.
Remember Sunday, what time?
It'll be 6 to 8. It'll be this room. It'll be in the announcements Friday too. So I've given you all the answers to number 1, all right? Let's get to 3. I told you the new supply curve is the old one set with a new intercept of 110. And then, number 4, redoing everything, equilibrium price, quantity, consumer surplus, producer surplus, with just the new supply curve. Everything else is the same. Equilibrium quantity is 4.5 million. Equilibrium price is 146. Consumer surplus is 121,500,000. Producer surplus.
We didn't have to do producer surplus.
Oh, that's right, you didn't have to do it. I was wondering why I didn't have the answer. And then, as far as how, first off, did y'all get these answers? Anybody dispute anything? I'll arm wrestle you over who has the right answer. Except girls. I won't arm wrestle girls because I'm scared I'll lose and have that to deal with the rest of my life. And last thing is, how are consumers affected overall? Can I erase this middle part? Consumer surplus before was 150 million. Consumer surplus now is 121.5 million. Consumer surplus fell, so consumers are worse off. How worse off are they? By that difference. Quantity was in per month, so the dollar amount, the reduction in consumer surplus is in a per month as well. If you took like new consumer surplus and subtracted it the old, just using how you look at a change, you end up with a negative number. That negative number means consumers are worse off. But you wouldn't want to say consumers are worse off by negative 28 million, because worse off by negative amount just doesn't sound right. Doesn't make sense. So I did it here this way. Consumers are worse off by this amount. The change would be negative 28.5 million. If all this is good with you, makes perfect sense, then I think you're good to go, and you will be glad you practiced this morning's exam.